of all my recordings are now on YouTube. So if you'd like to go hear them or share them, and Rabbi Anderson was okay with me making it public, so they're all searchable. If you search by like,
now you get $2 for each.
Yeah, sure. Once I cross 1 million hits, so
I'll put my thing on automatic hit.
yeah, something like that.
We'll run it 24/7.
Sure.
24/7, right.
Go over your robots, huh? So
Yeah,
if
I
you
think there is a flyer, so I'm gonna take that flyer and put it, see?
yeah, that's on the website.
It's on the website.
Yeah.
So we should put it on the Facebook, synagogue Facebook
Hmm.
page, and we should put
Do
it
they
on-
not do that? I didn't
I
really.
have no idea.
Yeah, I guess I don't know either.
Well, I can share it with it maybe, but I can't, no.
We could ask
Post to
someone.
it. I'm not
All
sure.
you gotta do is copy and paste it and.
I'll mention it to Rabbi Anderson.
Just put it on Facebook, that's
Sounds like a
it's
plan.
really easy.
So if you search by like Aish Kabbalah or Aish Kabbalah, or I think even Las Vegas Kabbalah, they'll all, because there's not much else using those same terms. So
Or your name.
I don't remember if my name is attached to the file because I uploaded it and it was tagged by my name. I just don't remember. Or maybe it'll come up because it's my account that it's on. I don't remember. I didn't try. Maybe after class I'll pull up my browser or pull up YouTube and try. Okay. I had
I'm gonna put it.
kind of promised a while ago that the way I would try to pattern the class is that we would start class with some discussion about the Parsha of the week, and this is Parsha Vayera. So we'll just discuss one particular topic. We'll talk about the topic related to this idea that over the course of the plagues, and actually even before the plague started, Hashem shares with Moshe and Aaron that he's going to harden Paro's heart. That's what he says. But I'm going to harden his heart, and he's not going to let you go, and it's a prophecy or prediction, however you want to look at it. And it's something that the commentators in the Torah struggle with, and they provide several different accounts for it. And we're going to go through a couple of those. So first of all, the point of any time we're studying the Parsha is to understand what lesson is it supposed to bring for us modern day. The Torah wouldn't be written the way it was if it weren't for the fact that we're supposed to learn from it modern day, not just see somebody else's experience. So one thing that we can just learn in general from Paro's actions is that he's clearly going through a pattern. Plague 1 he says he'll let you go. He decides not to. Plague 2, Plague 3, Plague 4, we go on and on. Even Plague 10, sort of, he doesn't really let go. But he goes through hardship along the way, and it's just, same thing, different day. Same thing, different day. And we all have to admit that some way, somehow in our lives, we live that as well. It doesn't mean that our whole life is like that. It just means some aspect of our life is something we repeat on a daily or a weekly basis or monthly basis, and it keeps on coming back and giving us hardship, and we just refuse to acknowledge it. And by acknowledging it, we can see it as an opportunity and try to move on. So that's a very surface level. So the real challenge that the commentators fight over when it comes to Paro and his hardened heart is how can we see what he's doing as how can we see this as free will? So, and we've talked about this in class quite a bit, the idea of free will. So how can God, so to speak, control Paro by hardening his heart, and yet God still wants us to believe that he runs the world with free will? So here's a few thoughts for you. So first of all, one idea the commentators bring is that you can give up a portion of your free will when you repeatedly sin when you had free will. So, meaning, what appears to be a removal of your free will is, in essence, a punishment of your own doing. So you start life with free will, you make a choice, and we'll talk about it again in physical circumstances. You start life in most places in the world as a free person. You have liberties in your life, and you choose to commit a crime and get arrested and get thrown in jail. A portion of your free will is taken away from you. Now, again, we're talking about physical free will versus spiritual free will, but that's what happens. And in essence, that's part of what Paro did. By Paro inflicting suffering upon the Jewish people in Egypt, he created a pattern of suffering for himself that resulted in a removal of part of his free will. So he is basically suffering the consequences of the way that he behaved when he had free will. That's one idea that's brought. Another idea that's brought is the fact that his pattern is one of having no remorse over his decisions. So even though he keeps on saying, okay, I'm going to let the Jewish people go, he didn't really say that, we'll say, again, of his own free will. He said that just to be done with being punished, you know? So I don't want this pain, I don't want this suffering anymore. I'm going to say that I'm going to let them go, either without meaning it or with no remorse over even if I do mean it. I have no remorse about what I did that caused me to be in this situation to begin with. And when you choose to do that, again, a portion of your free will kind of has to be taken away. That's the consequence of not being truthful, of not being forthcoming, of not using your heart in the right way and seeing, I made a mistake. I need to tshuva. I need to repent. I need to have remorse. I need to have understanding for what got me into this so that I don't repeat it again. And when you choose not to do that, you are forced, so to speak, by your tikkun to repeat the process. You force yourself. Again, you're taking away your own free will. And then the third idea that's brought is that the hardening of the heart wasn't really hardening in the way of it wasn't taking his free will away. It was more, the analogy it's made is like a doctor gives somebody medicine in order to ease their pain. Okay? But they know they're sick, and they know that they have something that they have to do about that sickness, and all they keep on doing is asking for the medicine to cover the pain, so to speak. It's not curing it, and that's what's happening to Paro. His heart is hardened by God in order to overcome the pain of what he's feeling in his heart, so to speak, but he's still got to be the one to choose what to do about it. He's still got to be the one to get back to the source level of what it is. So actually, in this particular way of looking at it, there is no removal of free will. He was always free to do what he wanted, and if anything, hardening of his heart was actually a little bit of a positive. Okay, now you can do something about it. Now we've removed some of the suffering that you feel in your heart, and now you can decide on your own whether or not you're going to go through that suffering again, so that I have to harden your heart again, or whether you're going to overcome the suffering and actually act with your own free will to let the Jewish people go and move on with your life. Okay, so those are some ideas that you can take with you as you go into this next week, as you listen to the Torah on this weekend of Vayera.
But Ellie, wasn't the sole purpose was to get to the 10th plague?
So there's a way of seeing it that way, and it's important and it's relevant, but it's important and relevant only from the idea that the 10th plague represents our freedom, so to speak, right? You needed to get to the point where the Jews have the opportunity to become free of their bondage in Egypt. Did that really have to happen after 10 plagues? Well, I hope that we can learn from the lesson that it shouldn't make it to the 10th plague for us. We don't want to emulate Paro. Paro opened the channel for us to have to get to the 10th plague, for us to keep on going and going and going until the suffering is truly so deep it's intolerable. But we don't have to repeat that pattern. So that's the best way that I understand it. I'll also just very briefly share in my own experiences during this past week how important I want to make it to emphasize that Kabbalah should not, or this class in particular, but the Kabbalistic wisdom should not be your only source of your connection to the portion of the week, to Torah wisdom in general, to Jewish studies, and that I hope in your own way each of you are making some type of commitment, more so than maybe you did last year, especially since it's still kind of just the new year, to somehow connect to that in a bigger and better way than you were last year. Anything. There is, as I've emphasized before, a little bit of a danger, a little bit of an opportunity for misunderstanding and misuse of Kabbalistic wisdom when it's the only thing that's studied. Kabbalah, in its essence, is still a commentary on the Torah, on the Zohar, which is a commentary on the Torah, which is a commentary on our lives.
Why is it a risk?
Because it's not the source from the standpoint of our lives in this physical world. So what we're talking about, and this, when I started the idea of what are we talking about when we say Kabbalah, we're talking about spiritual. We're talking about non-physical aspects as much as we can. It's the understanding of how the non-physical world reflects into our physical world. So if we see certain patterns emerge from the non-physical teachings, we can start to predict in our head how that will affect us in the physical world, and we can be wrong about that very easily. It can very quickly and easily cause us to make assumptions about things that aren't correct. So, just as an example, if you read some of the Kabbalistic wisdom that relates to the idea of unity, you can very quickly be deluded into thinking that unity means this idea of, hey, why don't we all just get along, you know? And unity has a much, much deeper and more intense, I'll say, qualification than that idea. Everybody's invited to the table. Everybody's invited to discuss but the idea of always having peace, for example, is not by itself the idea of unity. But it can appear to be that way. And I've seen it. I've seen it in people's discussions. You know, they want to incorporate things from different religions, from different spiritual teachings, and it deludes them into other ideas that are, it's not Kabbalah. It's not the Torah path. There are other places where you can go and study things that are not the path of the Torah. And if that's what you'd like to do, that's fine. But if you're on the path of Kabbalah, it means you need to be linked to Torah, Talmud, Zohar, all together, all of it, all aspects of it.
But it seems like it's not going to be enough anyway.
What's not going to be enough?
The very little that I might get here and there from the Torah, or and the Parashat Shavua would never be really high enough in level to correspond to the Kabbalah, I guess.
And again, what I'm just saying is, if you can make a commitment to do something a little bit more this year than you did last year, something, and you might be surprised. I've shared for myself a few situations where I've been surprised by what I've seen in texts that I had. Tricia said, I don't need to learn that. I'm not going to get anything out of that. And I've been very surprised by the things I've gotten out of it. So you might be as well. All right. I'm going to try to recap last week as quickly as I can and move on to some other things. Again, we're continuing to read from this our study from the Hakdamah Sefer Zohar, which was written by Rav Ashlag. It's theoretically it's the introduction to the Zohar, but it's not actually published in his writings of the Zohar that I know of. It's not published in the Sulam. It's published in another book. Okay. So, very quickly, one of the things that we talked about was this idea that God doesn't actually receive from us anything, can't receive from us. He's full, He's infinite, He's not subject to change. However, we do use a lot of metaphors when it relates to Him. And the specific ones that we normally use are about the idea that our mitzvot, our activities, our transformation, give Him happiness and pleasure. And that's okay. It's okay to use those metaphors. You'll hear them tonight as I read. But they are, at the end of the day, metaphors. And it's good to kind of keep in the back of your head that despite all of our studies and despite all of our understanding and all the writings, we can't ever really fully comprehend God. He does remain infinite, and He does remain beyond us. Again, I'll emphasize the point that we've made the last few weeks. What was the purpose of creation? To provide benefit to that which was created. And how did that happen? It happened by the creation of the desire for God's goodness. That was God's something from nothing creation. He created desire for God's goodness. And we'll see again as the evening goes on how that desire was, once again, the only thing that was needed. The enjoyment that we receive is proportional to our desire. The bigger our desire and the bigger thing that we find, the more enjoyment we are going to receive from it. Something we introduced that was new last week is the time that we are dealing with right now, that we're toiling in, our physical world, is basically the manufacturing process. And if we think about God as being the creator or the manufacturer or the designer, then we have to think that which He designed was, number one, with a plan in mind, because otherwise you'd have to see God as foolish, and number two, perfect. I mean, if God is perfect, His creations must be perfect. And God wouldn't make something perfect without first making a plan to have it be perfect. Otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense. So, if we want to lay blame, so to speak, or if we want to see that what happens in this world is doesn't look all good, doesn't look perfect, then there's only one source for that imperfection. It's God. We're basically blaming God. And I'm not saying that we should blame God or not blame God. We'll come to a conclusion about that later. But that's what we're doing, and we should acknowledge that. We should acknowledge that when you say that which was created is imperfect, then you're saying that which created it was imperfect. And I think we mentioned the idea that you wouldn't blame a bad suit. You wouldn't blame the bad suit for being bad. You would blame the tailor who made it. And we even brought this story from the Talmud about Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, who called a man ugly. And the man said to him, maybe you should talk to my creator who made me about how I got so ugly. It's an interesting story. So, how does the idea of evil come from holiness? This is our desire to receive for the self alone, and that's what we are. That's what we were created with. We are created with desire. That's what we have. That's what God made us with. But if we want to change, if we want to improve our relationship with God, because God is not desired to receive for the self alone. In fact, He has no desire or ability to have desire. It means we can't stay in this place permanently. We have to go through a process of fixing it. So in order to fix it, God created two systems. He created the system of holiness, and He created the system of impurity. Impurity, the commentators sometimes will use the word dead to refer to that which is impure. And people who behave in that level of impurity can be referred to as dead because they are infinitely far away from God. As long as they are basing all of their needs and the way they live their life on their desire to receive for the self alone, they are in essence completely disconnected from their Creator, completely disconnected from the source of life, and therefore they are, quote unquote, dead.
How does it line up with the fact of perfection? of the Creator.
Okay, let's get there. All right. So, the idea is to become a receiver in order to give. This is the representation of the spiritual world that has now become evolved into our physical world. So in the spiritual world, there's a spiritual body who has a desire to receive, and now we have a physical body that has a desire to receive. And that physical body needs to connect back to its spiritual soul, its essence, which is a part of God, which is receiving for the sake of sharing. And even more so, and I'm going to very, very briefly retell the story because I think it's important to hit the idea home. There's a story that's told in the Talmud. There's a section of the Talmud that talks about all the different ways that men and women can become married, the different acts that they go through in order to be married. And normally the way it works is the man gives the woman something. They gives her a ring. That's the most common. And through that process, the marriage is consecrated, basically. So there's one circumstance that's discussed by the Torah where a woman gives a man of stature, that's how he's described, gives a man of stature a ring, and in that case they're also married. And Rav Ashlag asks, how's that possible? Well, when he's a man of stature, whatever exactly that means, the idea of him being a man of stature is one that the ring to him doesn't have a specific value. He can't place on it that he needs it or even wants it or has a desire for it. So when he accepts the ring, he recognizes that what he's doing is giving his bride pleasure in the acceptance of the ring. It's all one act. It's not two separate acts. We call it the desire to receive for the sake of sharing or of giving, which sounds like, I'll take and then I'll give to you, like two separate steps. But in this case, it's by accepting, what I'm actually doing is giving. I'm giving pleasure to my bride by accepting the ring from her. It's one act that is the way that our relationship with God is supposed to be. That is the level of perfection. That is the level of connecting back to our source. Receiving and giving is the same thing. It's all one act. And it's not done with any reward in mind. And again, I think that's the idea of him being a man of stature. A man of stature is somebody who doesn't have the ability to receive reward, so to speak, for taking something or giving something. Yeah.
But how about in the case of the woman? Why is that any different?
So
Even though the stature isn't there, why isn't the giving and the receiving and the...
It is essentially, right? So by her giving, she's receiving the groom, so to speak. She's receiving the bond, the whole
giving.
Right, by him. So she's giving for him to receive in order to give her the pleasure that she gave to him. It's all one.
Can you diagram that somewhere?
Yeah, that'd be fun, wouldn't it?
Just a little bit. No, but you understand what I'm saying? The fact that she's giving to him, right, and he is receiving, and then that's giving to her.
He's
Okay.
giving her pleasure.
Okay, but,
He's
but couldn't it be the other way around, where the man gives the woman the ring and she's giving him pleasure by accepting the ring?
Well, I think again the definition here, by definition, the idea is that again, being a man of stature, you'd have to be in a position where the ring doesn't actually represent anything to you. So in all the other cases, where if a man gives a woman the ring actually, number one, may represent, or most likely does represent, some type of value to her. And number two, it actually is the fulfillment of the act of marriage.
By her accepting it and saying yes, she gave him the pleasure of being his bride, or,
Right.
I mean, the engagement or the...
Yeah, but I think that it's in the case that if he's a man of stature,
That's different, yeah.
yeah, so
But
what can she give him? Like, he has everything.
Right, she is still getting the ring. She's getting something of value.
But in this case, it's like giving her obviously the pleasure of the giving.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So I probably.
But but the idea is he's giving her something.
I think that Stuart asked the other way around. What the guy gets when he gives her the ring? Because the lady gets the ring, but he gets the pleasure of
I
saying
think
yes, I do.
because usually not as a man of stature or someone normal from the people, maybe to get a ring is like harder. I don't know. It's more expensive. It's hard.
Right,
to work for it,
she is
so-
receiving something that has value
Right.
to her. So she's taking it, so to speak.
Right.
It's not a criticism. I hope we're not seeing it that way. It's just
I
that
actually thought about it the other day, and it dawned on me that it actually makes a lot of sense.
What, the value of it?
Yeah, because the other time I was actually criticizing it. The act of
Giving a ring?
her giving him the ring and all that it puts her
No,
even
it
in a
makes
weirder
very much
position.
sense to me, I think.
But yeah,
okay. Anyway, so that's the idea. Again, all the stories we're telling here, they're just analogies. This is kind of the best we can do.
and the spirit.
Yeah, to understand the spirit of what we're trying to explain. I'm sure it's not perfect. No matter.
Giving you receiving.
Yeah.
That's it.
I think I'd mentioned something that my wife had come up with this idea. A kid brings you a glob of Play-Doh that they think is really just the coolest thing ever because they made some shape that you can't even see in it, and they want to give it to you, and you take it from them. I mean, really, you're going to tell me that Play-Doh has some value, but to them it does. You receiving it gives your child so much pleasure. It's hard to imagine like what you're giving to them by receiving of something of no value. Okay. Without the impurity of the desire to receive, we don't have any desire for all of God's goodness. So evil has to be there basically at the beginning in order for us to transform it into a desire for God's goodness. So initially it looks like we have a goodness for evil for the purposes of transforming it to goodness, basically. And one of the ideas that relates to this is that it's described in the upper worlds, desire, and we'll call it again evil desire, is bonded to God like no other bond there's ever been. It's a oneness in the time of creation. So how is that possible? It's possible because in God's eyes there's no time. There's no time. So the bonding of desire to God's oneness of giving is existing at its end state in the initial stages of creation for God, from God's perspective. So when God created desire at the time of creation, it was instantly and completely and in full purity fulfilled. As much as you can say instantly, which is a matter of time as well. But that's what happened. He was instantly transformed into a stage, and we'll talk about what these situations are in just a second. We've talked about these before. We talked about these last week. He was instantly in that place where the creation of the desire was good, it was perfect, and it's receiving all of God's goodness in all infinite blessing. And part of the way we can see this is that the Hebrew words shemo, his name, and ratzon, desire, have the same numerical value. They have the same gematria, right? Shin, 300, mem, 50, right? Vav, 6, 356, right? Let's see, Reish is 200, Tzadik is 90, Nun is 60, right? So up to 350, and a Vav again is, 356. Okay, good. I'm glad it worked out. So, because sometimes we say, Hashem Echad Shmo Echad. That's one of the things that we say. God is one and His name is one. So what is that oneness? That oneness, Shmo, His name, the oneness of His name, is the oneness with Ratzon, with desire. His name.
I always feel that the Gematria is almost like a game that They say, oh, this matches and
So it's
But
so,
oh, and this matches
is
too. It almost
sometimes.
seemed like
yeah,
Sometimes,
right.
yeah, it is.
It looks like a game, but there is an incredible perfection to it. It's not something to play with. It's really not. It's not something to play with. It's this is one of the areas where if you study again Kabbalah all by itself, you can begin to see patterns emerge that aren't actually there because you didn't understand exactly the source, and it's relevant.
you think actually when they wrote it, the pattern was so perfect that it matches into a numeric.
I have a couple of books that are just about the Hebrew letters and the shape of the Hebrew letters in their Ashurit form, and even that is in a state of perfection.
So it's not a retrofit. You know
Right,
what I
feels
mean?
like right.
Like
Because
we're trying-
right, hindsight is 20/20, right? You can see it now, and you can go back and see how it all fits.
Sometimes it makes me too. I think that
It's now we have computers and calculators, and we can figure out all these numerical values and equivalencies and stuff like that. If you look in the Zohar, you'll see somewhere they've got a phrase of like 4 words, and it equals the numerical value of some other phrase with 3 words plus, whatever. Like, wait a minute, what did they went through the whole Torah or the Mishlei or the whatever, and they calculated this
So
really.
maybe could it be that since we're arriving to an era in which AI and computers are going to be much more evident and maybe ruling in somewhat the world, could it be that maybe with the right calculation, just like when you undo Ktav Starim, how do you say Ktav Starim? Ktav Starim is Tzofen, like the Da Vinci Code, right? So,
like a code.
so
Well, you know about the Aish Discovery Program, yeah? You've heard about this? I mean, it's it's called the Discovery. I mean, I saw it when I was a kid. It's the Aish Discovery Program. I don't even know if they do these presentations anymore. I'm sure Rabbi Wein used to do them.
What is it?
Sure he did.
Never heard about it.
No, it's the Bible Code.
So could it be like the whole Bible is actually
A code?
could sum into 2 words?
Yeah,
That's
it's
it, and will tell us this is
try and look it up, or I'll look it up on YouTube. I mean,
Sometimes
these presentations have been around for 30 years. They used to do Shabbatons where they did them.
I
Yeah,
don't know.
It's a code. It's a lot of things.
It's okay.
I'll forget by the time I stop.
yeah. So you should go ahead.
Okay, but the Torah was written by Hashem. Okay, and everything that, all these books and everything that's being done is being done to try to understand that.
Okay.
I mean, right or wrong.
Yeah.
The Zohar is an attempt to isn't it an attempt to understand the Torah? Basically, I mean, to get to the nitty gritty of what the Torah is all about, what it's trying to tell us.
Okay.
Okay, so and the purpose and the Torah has been studied for 20 years at least. Okay, and so it's not hard to think of the fact that maybe there are messages in there that have to be dug out, and this is why people are doing it. So I don't think that's so hard.
And it has to be done in the context of the time that one lives in. And actually, I think we're going to get to that. We've been through it before, but hopefully we're going to get to it again
That's why
tonight.
I said that we're in our era. We're getting into a point in which we might.
There's
have
a
enough
reason. Yeah, there's a reason why we
computer power
have.
They,
There's a reason why we have the
Because-
computers. There's a reason why we have YouTube and all these other amazing tools to share. There's a reason, and it's in God's wisdom that we have it, and that it's possible. But yeah, maybe look up the Aish Discovery Program. I think it's what it was called, Discovery Program.
The Yesh or the Aish?
Aish HaTorah. Aish HaTorah, the Yeshivat Aish HaTorah in Jerusalem. That they were the ones who founded or created this program that reveals aspects of the
So how
code
do
of
you
the
look for
Bible.
it? Just Aish?
I've never looked for it on YouTube. I'll bet you the presentations are there.
Yeah, but you look for it as Aish. That's like
I would
so
probably,
what
I'd
is,
probably look.
there's a book that is like
I think there was a
code?
book from what I remember. So you find that for example, in the there's an entire parsha of the Torah where Moshe's name doesn't appear. Right? He asked that. He says, if this is the way you're going to treat the Jews, fine, write me out of your Torah. So the entire next parsha, he's not in it. So there's a in the deciphering of the code. So basically, there's a numerical sequence coding. So imagine that the block of letters that you see in the Torah were all just on a grid, 20 by 20 grid or 30 by 30 grid, letter, and it was like a big word find. So you can find in that portion. I might be saying this wrong, but I think in that parsha, in that portion, if you do that with all the letters, you can find Moshe's name in more places than you can basically anywhere else in the Torah. But you got to understand the code, so to speak, in order to find it. So imagine every 20 letters appears Moshe, and a little bit further down, every 13 letters, Mem, Shin, Hey, and then 2 more psukim after that, 15 letters apart, Mem, Shin, Hey. You wouldn't see it unless it was all laid out on a grid, but that's what they did. They laid it all out on a grid, and it appears all over the place. That's
I
the.
still don't know if it's retrofit or not, but
Okay.
it doesn't matter.
It appears in places that you can't imagine that it would appear. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, okay. So what we concluded with last week was this idea of the 3 situations that the soul goes through. So situation 1 is in the thought of creation, where what we just talked about before is what happens. So God creates the world with desire, and so the initial thought of creation exists in the same time or at the same time that the perfection of the fulfillment of the desire with God's goodness is also happening. Time, again, for God is non-existent, so the initial state, the thought of creation and the completion of the thought of creation are there in the same situation at the same time, again, even though there's no time. Situation number 2 is the time that we live in right now. It's a time for a transformation of the soul, of our spiritual soul. And how do we go through that transformation? By destroying the spiritual body. The spiritual body represents receiving, spiritual soul represents giving. And in this physical world, it's our job to connect to our spiritual soul and destroy, abandon, find a way to rid ourselves of our spiritual body. That's the transformation process that we're going through. Situation number 3 is the resurrection of the dead, the Tichiyat Metim. This is the ultimate goal. This is where we're trying, more or less the ultimate goal. This is where we're trying to get to. This is when our body will come back to us, our spiritual body, not necessarily our physical body, our spiritual body will come back to us for the purposes of its final transformation so that it can exist back where it was in situation 1, where it's receiving in perfection with God. Okay, those are situations 1, 2, and 3. So the amazing result of all this that we basically find is the process from a time perspective is non-linear. Okay, we like to think of it as God made the world, we're living in the world, and at the end there will be time of Mashiach. But that's not the case. For God, He's already at the time of Mashiach. So the truth is, situation 3 existed or already exists and creates the need to be back in the thought of creation in situation 1, which then creates the need for transformation in situation 2. So the only reason why we live here in this world to do the work that we have is because God's already waiting for us at the end. That's the only reason it exists. So again, imagine like you're running a marathon. The only reason that there's a need for you to have a starting line and for you to run 26 point whatever miles is because there's an end game. Because there's the finish line where people are waiting for you and cheering you on and somebody gets to win the game. Otherwise, what would be the point? There's no reason to go and run a race if there's nowhere to end at. So the end comes first. As crazy and strange as that sounds. Okay? And another analogy that I gave last week is the idea of building a house. Right? So we drive down the street and we see a house there and we think of it and we think of the linear process that resulted in that house being there. And now it's there, it's built, and I can move in. So at some point it wasn't there, at some point the land was acquired, at some point it was built, and then at the end it was in creation, now I can move in. But the truth is, that house had to have existed in somebody's head in a future state in order for them to take the time to plan it, to buy the land, to plan it out, to work with an architect, to get the general contractor out there, to dig up the grass and have it look terrible along the way. It doesn't even look like a house at certain stages. Like, what is this thing? What is it that you're working in? What's going on here? But why did you even need to plan for the house? Because you had the thought that at some point in the future there would be a house standing on that plot and somebody's going to move in and buy it and live in it and be happy and warm and, warm in the winter and cool in the summer. That's the actual process. So the current state only exists because the future is already there.
When we're talking about the process that, someone decides to commit a suicide or whatever and finish, and it's not really a good thing. What happens when someone actually jumps on a grenade to save all his friends?
You're saying what happens to them spiritually?
Yeah.
So it's a good question.
Because supposedly it's the most sacred way to save others.
Become a martyr,
and
basically.
Sacrifice yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's too many details to go into, and it happens to be that just this past week I was listening to a drasha, to a shiur about misirut nefesh, right? Which basically means, it's normally translated as martyrdom, basically, giving your soul for the ultimate cause. Those things and those mitzvot that basically obligate you to give your soul. So first of all, you'd have to be in that situation. And I don't know what that situation would be. Only that person would understand whether this exact circumstance, jumping on that grenade, is really giving their soul, or whether, as crazy it may sound, there's some selfishness in that act. Okay? So let's assume that there was true selflessness in that act. And let's assume that this was a mitzvah in the situation where that would have been required. So that is basically, by definition, what we're talking about here. It's understanding, it's the soul's understanding that their job in this world is to discard themselves of the physical and spiritual body. The physical and spiritual body are of no value to you. Okay? I mean, it's the transformation of that idea that the physical and spiritual body are of use to me. Somehow we think that they are, because they fulfill our pleasures and they fulfill our desires. But that's not where we're meant to be in the place of perfection. So the closer that we can get to the idea that these are actually, they are there for the purposes of being discarded, the closer we can reach to Hashem. Again, assuming we're doing so with a pure heart. Without a better way to put it. And I think actually we're going to get to a little bit of that right now too. So, again, in the first situation, the future already appears to God, and it basically in the term using in His eternality. It's like it's a present situation. Okay, that's our first situation. In the second situation, it's through the effort of Torah and mitzvot that we transform. Okay, so we're just about to start to move into the portion of this class where we're going to be discussing now that you know why the world looks the way it does, now that you know the thought of creation, and now you know where we're going, and why it looks, again, why it does on the way in between. Now we're going to start thinking about, so what do we do about it? What do we do about it? We follow the path of Torah and mitzvot. Why? Why? Because because it's through this effort, toiling, in this decay and in this transformation, that we're able to take that desire that we were given and make it into what it needs to be at the end in order for us to receive all of God's goodness and to fulfill the entire idea of the thought of creation. We were meant to receive all of God's goodness, but that cannot be done while we are in opposite of form with God. So we need to toil and decay this, throw away this body and transform it so that we understand that it's our soul that is connected to that aspect of Him. And then in the third situation, the body will undergo this final transformation. It will complete its tikkun, and the desire to receive will only be used as a vehicle for the desire to give. That thought will have been completed. Desire to receive all of God's goodness for the purposes of giving pleasure to the Creator. And again, I know going all the way back to the beginning of class, as we said, that's the idea of giving God pleasure is metaphorical, but it's metaphorical with a reason, to understand that we are destined to receive all of God's goodness for the purposes of giving all the pleasure to God. Now, something that if you think about it a little bit, you might start struggling with and might see that, hold on, so if the God already existed in the perfected state in the first situation, and He's just standing there waiting for us, and in the third situation, we'll go through this process of resurrection of the dead, and everything will be perfected. And we're only in the middle, the second situation, right now. So hold on. If the first situation is only there because of the third situation, then the second situation is just to get us to the third situation. Then what free will do we have? If we all know where we're going, what's free will about this life, about this world? Right? We know where we came from. We know where we're going. Where's the free will?
Charging of good energies.
So,
The journey. The journey of the girl.
Supposedly we have a purpose.
So the way that we go through the journey is the free will. And we talked about this in one of the very first classes. The journey can be done through pain, through suffering, in the time that was originally allocated for it to happen, or it can be done through joy of receiving God's goodness all along the way and transforming, knowing where we're going, and that we're speeding the process along through the fulfillment of the Torah and all of its mitzvot. So this is the purpose of the giving of the Torah, and this is the purpose of all the mitzvot according to the Kabbalistic wisdom. Okay? They are not a means to an end, which is why, again, going all the way back to the beginning, I presented this idea of pardes. If you are stuck in the pshat, if you are stuck reading only the Torah and only learning what the 613 mitzvot are, then you will not be able to transform into understanding that your role in doing these things is only to speed the process of getting to the resurrection of the dead, to getting to situation 3. They are not a means to an end. The mitzvot themselves are not the end. Right? Doing the mitzvot lends you to completing the process quicker. If you just do the mitzvot because somebody told you to do the mitzvot, that's a good starting point. That's not the end point. And that's the danger, again.
Is there any time frame for stage 2 somewhere? I mean...
The time frame that's given by the Kabbalists is 6,000 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I think that's actually...
What is it?
78.
years?
Yeah, 200 and something years.
Something.
Pack your bags.
We almost
Take your bags back.
And yeah, here.
You live long
Be
enough.
diligent in Torah mitzvot.
We will be there. I mean...
So basically the Torah is saying the biggest mitzvah is be happy. right?
Well, you will find happiness through doing the mitzvot.
That's what-
And the happiness that you have from doing the mitzvot.
You'll be happy.
That is the,
Because you're going to be close to God.
yeah, your happiness and joy is basically the closest you can get to fulfilling God's purpose in creation in the physical world. Because that's what he wants for you. He wants you to enjoy all of his goodness.
But it's within his rules.
Right.
It's within the rules.
It's within his rules.
Good energy will get us.
It's within his rules from the standpoint of this is how you go about the process of transformation. Okay. So, here's a couple of other things that Rav Ashlag writes. So, first of all, he says, we should not resent this process, for there is no other way. Okay? He's talking about the fact that we look like we've been condemned to a wretched existence, that humanity has so many faults. But the less we resent that idea, the less we'll find that that's true. So the world looks so miserable because we don't see the end. So if we see the end, and that this is just the process for us to get to the end, we'll stop seeing it as dark and evil. We'll stop seeing it and we'll be able to live in happiness. And we'll see that, here's what he says, the spiritual body, the desire to receive only for oneself, does not detract from our lofty state, since it is slated to die and to be voided. So we can already look forward to the time in our life where, and when I say in our life, I mean at the time of Techiyat Mitim, we can already look forward to the time in our life when our body will cease to exist and our desire to receive for the self alone and all the evil, so to speak, that we've created will be null and void. It'll be over with. And hopefully that will happen sooner than we think it's going to, sooner than the schedule that was made for it.
Can you imagine how much Rabbi Ashlag was enthused to die?
And that's an interesting place that a Kabbalist gets, and it's
Just for
one,
the curiosity.
it's one,
Okay,
it's one,
so what's actually there?
and it's one of the reasons why I've read why a Kabbalist, a true Kabbalist who needs to be, why they used to say they needed to be 40 and married and have certain knowledge, because otherwise this wisdom by itself could drive you crazy. I mean, it could drive you to, oh, I guess I need to be dead. Like, now.
Well,
Why am I waiting?
That's what you talk about suicide in people. Maybe they just don't want to suffer anymore and want the better life. I mean,
Yeah.
to make
But
it
still you
end.
have to have a certain,
Right? So,
certain deepness of soul to, that's what you say.
Yeah.
You can't just come in, okay, tell me all about it.
Yeah.
You know,
Now, nowadays, maybe you can a little bit more. You know, again, because we're open to so many other things, because the technology we see, because of our connection with the other 7 billion people in the world in different ways, because what we see on TV and hear on the radio and all these things, the way we can drive our car and fly on planes and get all over the world in ways that we never could imagine. So because we're open to all those other things, we can be more open to what used to drive people crazy. Wisdom that literally used to drive people crazy. And now we don't have to feel that way about it. We can be more exposed to it. But again, it doesn't change our need to be more grounded in the pshat and the remes and the drash. All right, here's another thing he says about how we understand our position in the world. Because we talked about, again, this idea that the entire world, we're supposed to see the entire world was created just for us. So he says, we shouldn't ask regarding other creatures that were created, only about humans. For people are the center of creation. The rest of creation was only created to help humanity on its spiritual quest and to achieve completeness. As a consequence of this, nature and animals become more passive or more aggressive depending on the actions of people. And he's not just talking about animals here. And well, he says nature and animals. And when
You mean the last 3 sentences about the aggressiveness of the animals?
yeah, as a consequence of this,
corrections.
as a consequence of this, of the need to focus only on humanity, and that the fact that nature and animals were created only to serve us, nature and animals become more passive or aggressive depending on the actions of people. So we need not concern ourselves with animals. We need not concern ourselves, so to speak, with the world, so to speak, but rather we concern ourselves
With the action.
with our personal actions and how we are behaving and interacting with others. So I'm going to read this last section verbatim.
It's a contradicting thing.
So you're saying
What?
Rav Ashlag is
the
saying,
law, okay, whoever, is saying that the concern or the laws that we have to keep animals safe, to make sure they're not
Harmed or extinct.
extinguished or is that the word slaughtered to where there aren't any more, like we've done to bees, and that's why there's no honey and all that. That's fine as long as it's
No.
what he's saying is that the reason why the bees are suffering is because of our actions, not with them, but with ourselves.
Oh, okay, that part.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
That's why it's happening. Otherwise, the bees are truly there to serve us. The bees are there to make us honey, to melt in our tea, and to serve to people at Shabbat dinner. That's what they're there for. They are there on this earth to serve us. But when we behave in selfish ways, we corrupt them. We kill them.
We create a bad energy, and the bad energy.
Otherwise, they wouldn't. Why the scientists think it's such a mystery, why all the bees are dying? Because we're a bunch of selfish pigs.
Thank you. That's exactly why.
It's not because we're killing them. It's because we're selfish pigs that's killing them. I mean, I'm telling you what Rav Ashlag is saying. All right, I'm going to read this last paragraph verbatim. I don't know how far we'll get through it.
Cynic in the crowd.
Good. Every crowd needs one.
That's the part where I'm leaving the room.
Fine. So let's read this.
That's the part where
Let's read this, and then I think if we get through it, which I'm just going to try and read it straight through, and we'll discuss it next week. Okay. With the above understanding, we can now understand I didn't go through the whole thing in verbatim, so I'm going to paraphrase it slightly so it makes more sense in context. With the above understanding, one of our first questions is now explained. We asked, since good produces good, how is it possible that God created creatures that suffer throughout their lifetimes? But as we said, all the sufferings are obligated from the first situation, the situation that came into reality from the future third situation that forces either in the way of the Torah or in the way of suffering, because both are possible in the second situation, in order to achieve our eternality in the third situation. The suffering is only upon the shell, the spiritual body, that was destined for death and burial. This teaches us that the desire to receive only for oneself was created in order to erase it and transform it into a desire to give. The pain that we experience are only revelations that divulge the worthlessness and damage that spread from the desire to receive. If all of mankind would agree to destroy the desire for themselves, and their desire would be only for others, all the worries and hazards would be eliminated. Everyone would be assured a healthy and complete life, for each of us would have an abundance of people who would take care and make sure that all of our needs are met. However, all the worries, suffering, wars, and corruption that we have no refuge from occur because we only think about ourselves. These weaken our bodies with diseases and pain. You now realize that all the suffering that we experience in our world, those that are featured before our eyes, appear in order to push us into canceling the evil shell that is the spiritual body and to accept upon ourselves the desire to give. As we have said, pain has the ability to bring us to the desired state. There are two types of mitzvot, those that are between man and God, and those that are between man and his fellow man. But know this, the mitzvot between man and his fellow man take precedence over the mitzvot between man and God, because giving to others leads one to give to God. The goal is between man and God, But the vehicle to that goal is through the mitzvot of man to man. And that's where we will end.
Does he want to run for president?
Right.
Oh,
Wow.
no?
No, not about that.
Thank you.